In the 10th year of chasing after Jason, I suddenly gave up. It turns out that years of unrequited love can really end in just one night. Last night, I was inexplicably deleted as a friend by Jason. Coincidentally, it was pouring rain when he deleted me. Amid the flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder, I huddled under the quilt with my legs curled up, adding him again and again, typing the words, "I'm scared. Please don't abandon me," over and over again, from being humble at first to numb in the end. I added him for the whole night. As dawn broke and the rain stopped, my love for him also ceased. Jason accepted my friend request at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the time he starts work. He has a strong sense of time. Even during the few dates we had, he always showed up right on time. Once upon a time, I was also fascinated by his self-discipline and punctuality. The thick curtain blocked the sunlight outside the window. When the phone screen lit up, my eyes that hadn't closed all night were stung by the strong light, and a few physiological tears streamed down, making them sticky and uncomfortable. It was a message from Jason. Just a few short words, "Have you learned your lesson?" If it were in the past, I would surely have asked him to clarify everything. But now, I just wanted to sleep. I swiped his chat box and clicked delete. This was the first time in 10 years that I didn't want to reply to him. Yes, don't bother me. After deleting him, I sent a message to Sarah, "Come to see me tonight. Let's go clubbing. I didn't sleep last night. I'll go to sleep first. By the way, please ask your brother for a leave of absence for me." Forget it, just help me resign directly. Sarah is Jason's sister with the same parents, and also my best friend since childhood. She looks down on her brother and can't understand why the rebellious me would be as docile as a cat without claws in front of her brother. Actually, it's not hard to understand. 10 years ago, that young man burst through the door and pulled me from that dark room into the sunlight, and I regarded him as a god ever since. Thinking about it carefully, he wasn't wrong. He just didn't love me. And now, I don't love him either. After sending the message, I turned off my phone and buried my head under the quilt, sleeping like a log. I slept until the afternoon and was woken up by the doorbell. I thought it was Sarah. I sleepily dragged my slippers to open the door. But the moment I opened the door, my eyes met Jason's, who was standing there in a neat suit. He was standing in the light, his thick eyebrows slightly furrowed, his posture upright. For a moment, it seemed to overlap with that noon 10 years ago. Even the impatient words, "What a sight," were exactly the same. It wasn't very presentable. I looked down at the loose pajamas on me that were wrinkled like a rag, and then rubbed my messy hair. It seemed so. But so what? Since I didn't love him anymore, how could I possibly care about my appearance? I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed and asked him lazily, "Why are you here?" After saying that, I yawned without any grace. Jason has a cleanliness fetish. Maybe he couldn't stand my slovenly appearance at the moment. He turned his head to the left with a dark face and stopped looking at me. "Why didn't you go to work? And your phone is turned off?" he asked me in a slightly hoarse voice, with a hint of anger. I raised my eyebrows and answered righteously, "I don't want to work there anymore. It was you who were clamoring for this job before, and now it's still you who say you don't want to do it anymore. Wendy, you're too willful." Willful? Yes, I've always been willful. I just hid all my sharp edges in front of him before. I curled my lips and said nonchalantly, "Is Mr. Jian just getting to know me today? I was always a good-for-nothing playboy, wasn't I?" We had an unpleasant parting with Jason. After going back to my room, I couldn't fall asleep anymore. I stared at the ceiling in a daze for a long time. My mind was full of the past between him and me. When I was 15, I followed him around. He glared at me coldly and asked impatiently if I could stop following him. When I was 16, I spent half a month learning to make cakes. After carefully packaging them, I handed them to him. He just took one look and then threw them into the trash can. He said he didn't like sweet things. When I was 17, my classmates laughed at me, saying that I was like Jason's dog. Coincidentally, he and I passed by together. I was so angry that I wanted to go and argue with them, but he stopped me. He said it wasn't necessary. When I was 18, After 18, he seldom paid attention to me. No matter how many times I confessed my love to him, he always had that attitude, neither accepting nor rejecting. How should I put it? It was like fishing. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Sarah. She was wearing a bright red long dress with heavy makeup, looking like a glamorous fairy. Burning. As soon as she entered the door, she kicked off her high heels and leaned forward to touch my forehead, muttering, "You don't have a fever either." I pushed her hand away and turned to enter the dressing room. I chose a black backless one-piece short dress, changed into it, and then sat in front of the dressing table to start doing my makeup. Sarah followed me, chattering away. "What's going on between you and my brother?" "I ran into him when I went to the company to pick up some documents for my dad today. His face was as ugly as if he'd eaten shit." "Nothing much. I just don't like him anymore." I interrupted her, dug out the curling iron and handed it to her. "Help me make some glamorous big waves." In the past few years, I had always dressed according to Jason's preferences. Pure and lovely long straight black hair, fairy-like elegant lady dresses. "Did you two have a fight? It shouldn't be like this. Didn't you always take his words as imperial decrees?" Sarah had made fun of me more than once, saying that I was like an innocent good girl, and didn't even mind that the outfit was inconvenient when drinking and fighting. To be honest, it was really inconvenient. I was clearly a wild child but forced myself to act like a lady. As soon as I finished speaking, Sarah got excited and the curling iron in her hand flew out. "Damn it. How did you figure it out?" "I used to suspect that my brother had put a spell on you." I ignored her and continued to hold my eyelid to draw eyeliner. At the end of my eye, I deliberately drew a seductive arc upward. After finishing, I adjusted a few strokes in front of the mirror until I was satisfied before turning back and smiling at her. "I'm done licking. Jason didn't put a spell on me. He just gave me the cold shoulder. Oh, besides the cold shoulder, there was also PUA. No matter what I did, I would get his negative. He said that I just needed to be obedient. He showed me with his actions that, Wendy, you have to be good. Only when you're good are you worthy of a response." Once upon a time, I was eager to get his love, so I did whatever he asked me to do, but now, I won't cooperate anymore. Before, after having a fight with my dad, I liked to drag Sarah to the bar to let off steam. I swayed and twisted to my heart's content under the exciting dance music. There, crying or laughing wouldn't attract strange looks. Sarah and I covered for each other very tacitly and successfully hid it from Jason. Until one time, I hit a hooligan who was trying to force himself on a little girl with a beer bottle. It wasn't a big deal. After all, my dad had plenty of money. The problem was that someone told Jason about it. He ignored me for a whole month. After that, I never went to the bar again. See, I was once so humble. Sarah and I drove to the bar we used to frequent. Stepping into this hustle and bustle again, it felt like a lifetime had passed. In the spring city where the mountains are high and the emperor is far away, there are not too many wealthy families, but not too few either. The Wendy family and the Jason family can't be said to be the top ones, but both families happen to have a good-looking but idle rich girl in the same year. That's me and Sarah. We chose a booth with a good view. As soon as we sat down, a boy in uniform walked up respectfully and handed us the ordering tablet. Sarah took a quick look and raised her eyebrows with a smile. "Wow, the quality of bar waiters is so high now." He had a cute baby face. I looked up at his words and saw an extremely delicate face. It was just too young, and there were still some baby fat on his face that hadn't disappeared. I also smiled and said, "Employing underage workers is illegal." The boy blushed with embarrassment at my words, and his earlobes turned a light pink. I'm an adult." He was really cute and couldn't take a joke. Maybe I didn't check the almanac before going out. 20 minutes later, Jason, who never set foot in entertainment venues, showed up at the bar. The bar owner was accompanying him, and there were 2 bodyguards in black following behind him. Another 10 minutes later, the bar was cleared. Under her brother's gaze, Sarah shrank her shoulders and hid behind me, successfully diverting that angry gaze onto me. His handsome face looked extremely gloomy under the flickering lights. Before today, If I saw Jason with a gloomy face, I would surely have groveled and tried to please him. And now, even just thinking about the things I did to degrade myself to please him before, I feel like such an idiot. Brushing aside the long, curly hair stuck to my face, I grabbed Sarah and tried to leave, but when passing by Jason, he grabbed my arm. "What's the matter?" "Wendy." He pronounced it very slowly and heavily, clearly suppressing great anger. I took a deep breath, put on a proper smile, turned around to look at him, and asked politely, "Mr. Jian, is there something wrong?" Jason probably wasn't used to the sudden change in my attitude towards him. His two sword-like eyebrows were tightly furrowed, forming a very deep V shape in the middle. "What's wrong with you?" he countered. I rolled my eyes to the sky, too lazy to keep circling around with him. I shook my arm to break free from his grip, grabbed Sarah, and walked out of the bar without looking back. Coming out of the bar, my mood for having fun was also ruined. I called a designated driver to send Sarah and me back home respectively. Each went back to our own home, she went to find her mom, and I went back to sleep. Don't ask me why it's not, each goes back to their own home, each goes to find their own mom. The reason is that I don't have a mom. My mom jumped off the building on a rainy night 10 years ago, leaping without any hesitation right in front of me. I originally wanted to follow her, but was grabbed by my dad when I rushed to the window. Coincidentally, a huge bolt of lightning streaked across the sky. Lying by the window from which my mom jumped, I could clearly see the winding blood on the ground. Since then, I've been terribly afraid of thunderstorms. I thought I could sleep until I woke up naturally, but the next morning I was woken up by the phone ringing again and again. I picked up the phone that was thrown aside and took a look. It was Jason's assistant. After hesitating several times, I still pressed the answer button. After all, there was no need to have a falling out with everyone just because of Jason. Jason's assistant was surnamed Gu, in his 30s, an extremely capable and disciplined person. Even when making a phone call, he had a strictly businesslike attitude. "Secretary Wendy, you're already 15 minutes late." Such a precise statement. I got this secretary position after pestering Jason for a long time, said to be a secretary, but actually I was just a decoration. Usually, my work was nothing but making coffee for Jason or ordering takeout for him when he worked overtime. I hadn't even done things that were slightly related to a regular secretary's job, like accompanying him to social events or delivering documents. So when I wanted to resign, there was no need for a handover. After being Jason's secretary for 2 years, I was never acknowledged by him. The female companions by his side at banquets changed one after another, and I was never among them. "Sorry, Brother Gu," I replied politely. "I've already told Mr. Jian that I'm quitting." As soon as I finished speaking, a crisp snap came from the other end of the phone. It was the sound of a cup falling to the ground and breaking. I thought it should be the couple's cup that I brought back from Disneyland and placed on Jason's desk, but he never used. "Well, it's broken. It doesn't matter anymore." After sleeping, the curls in my hair had loosened a bit. After combing it in front of the mirror for a long time, I decided to go to the hair salon to get a perm and also dye my hair. After simply getting myself ready, I picked up my bag and went out. Spring City is a very beautiful city. It's like spring all year round, with flowers everywhere. Even in the scorching July, the breeze on the face still carries a hint of coolness. I chose a hair salon on the roadside that looked quite pleasing to the eye. As soon as I pushed the door open, a boy sitting on a high stool beside the bar counter and wearing a beige oilcloth apron stood up and came over. He bent slightly and said politely, "Welcome." When he stood up straight and his eyes rested on my face, his handsome baby-faced look showed a moment of surprise. "What a coincidence. Nice to see you again." I waved to him with a smile. He nodded slightly, and a thin layer of redness appeared on his face again. Like peach blossoms in full bloom in spring, it was really good looking. It seems that he's not that he can't take a joke, but that he's too shy. He should be only responsible for receiving customers. After I told him that I came to get a perm, he left and called another boy who looked a few years older. I chose a silver gray color according to the color palette. The whole process took more than 3 hours. But the result was quite good. After getting my hair done, I originally wanted to say goodbye to that good-looking boy with baby fat. After all, running into him by chance in different places for 2 consecutive days could be considered a kind of fate. I looked around but didn't see him, so I just let it go. He was just a passerby who happened to meet by chance. 08 I originally thought so until I met him again a few days later. It rains a lot in Spring City in summer, and the rain often comes without warning, so I seldom go out alone at night. If it weren't for Sarah calling me hysterically, I wouldn't be hiding under the overpass right now, scaring Sarah to shiver. I curled up, tightly clutching my phone that had run out of battery and shut down, repeating to myself over and over again, "It's okay, it's okay." But when the next thunderclap rang out, I still couldn't help but cover my head and close my eyes tightly. In my mind, besides the bright red blood, there was also the humble me who added Jason again and again. He knew it clearly. He knew that I was most afraid of thunderstorms. But on that night, he still left me alone to spend the long, dark night. I don't know if everyone yearns for a straw to hold on to when they are extremely panicked and scared. Right now, I especially hope that someone can show up and be by my side. Even if it's Jason, I would be extremely grateful. I know I'm being really spineless now, but I can't help it. I'm really scared. Maybe God heard my prayer and really sent someone to be with me. It's just that that person wasn't Jason. He was carrying big and small bags of luggage, walking through the rain curtain, step by step towards me. He was soaking wet, looking as wretched as could be. How should I describe it? Like a stray dog. I slowly put down the hands that were covering my head and asked him softly, "Did you lose your home too?" He was stunned. It took him a long time to utter a yes from his throat. I patted the space beside me, indicating for him to sit. He was quite obedient. Although it was midsummer in August, the dampness on his body still made me shiver. He should have noticed it too. He pursed his lips and silently moved a bit away. Having a living person beside me who could talk to me made me less scared than before. "What's your name?" I asked, tilting my head. He was still reserved, his head hanging very low, but his enunciation was clear. "Edward." "His name is Edward, and mine is Wendy." Wendy, why not return? Look, our names are so faded. Did your parents abandon you too?" I continued to ask. His head hung even lower, and his voice became a bit hoarse. "I don't know. I grew up in an orphanage. Maybe it was because of the atmosphere, or maybe I was longing too much for a home. On a whim, I said to him, 'I'll give you a home. I'll give you a home, and you give me a home too.' 09 We sat under the overpass for a long time and talked for a long time. He told me that his name was Edward. Since the dean found him in the snow-covered ground, he was given a homophone as his surname. He also told me that after his 18th birthday, he moved out of the orphanage to live independently. Tonight, because the landlord suddenly raised the rent and he thought it was unreasonable, he argued with the landlord and was then evicted. I asked him, "You've worked so many part-time jobs. You shouldn't be unable to afford that little rent, should you?" I received the admission notice from Capital University. His eyes were bright when he answered me, full of longing and hope for the future. "I worked during the summer vacation to earn tuition fees." "How much is it?" "I'll pay it for you," I said. I don't lack money, but I do lack love. And, quite a lot. If I didn't lack love, I wouldn't have chased after Jason for so long. He shook his head and said, "No need. The tuition isn't expensive. I've already saved enough." He bit his lower lip, hesitated for a few minutes, and then asked, "Will we be a family from now on? The kind of family that won't abandon each other, right?" His black eyes were full of cautious anticipation. I nodded. Yes. No abandonment. When I was 14, the woman my father, who was always away from home, kept outside was brought to light. My mother couldn't bear it and jumped off the building right in front of us. Since then, I've had no home. Once, I thought that Jason, who had led me into the sunlight, would be my destination. So for all these years, I was obedient to him in every way, following his every command. Even if many people said I was shamelessly clinging to him, I didn't care. Because I really wanted to have a home. In the end, at 24, Jason also abandoned me. Fortunately, I picked up an 18-year-old kid. Finally, I have a home again. 10 When the rain stopped, we went back to the apartment together. Sarah had been waiting at the door for I don't know how long. As soon as she saw me, she rushed over and hugged me, crying loudly. I'm sorry, Wendy. I didn't know it would rain so heavily. I didn't mean it. I couldn't find you. I gently patted her back to calm her down and coaxed her softly, I'm back now. Don't cry. She sniffled and continued crying, you must have been so scared out there alone. It's all my fault. Indeed, I was scared at first. Fortunately, I met Edward later. Thinking of Edward, I quickly pushed Sarah away and pointed to the shy big boy behind me to introduce them to each other. This is Edward, my brother. Sarah, my best friend. Sarah wiped her tears randomly and said in astonishment, when did you get a brother? How come I didn't know? He's that waiter who took our order in the bar that day. I nodded. Yes. From now on, we two sisters will depend on each other. Sarah's beautiful facial features twisted into a knot. After a while, she tugged at the corner of my clothes and asked hesitantly, Wendy, are you really giving up on my brother? It's not that I don't want him, but that I can't afford to have him anymore. 11 It was Sarah who took the initiative to tell me that her brother had gone on a business trip to another place and wouldn't be back for 10 days or half a month. I hadn't seen Jason since we left the bar last time. So when I got up in the middle of the night to get some water and passed by the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room and saw a tall figure smoking by the streetlight downstairs, I once doubted whether I was seeing things. Or maybe I was sleepwalking. After waking up, I picked up my phone and sent a message to Sarah, has your brother come back? After waiting for more than 10 minutes, she sent 2 voice messages. No, he's still in Shanghai. Wendy, I didn't even tell you yesterday how awful my brother was. I was so worried when I couldn't find you that I called him and told him about it. But he just replied with a yes and hung up on me. Seriously, what a person. It seemed that I had indeed seen wrongly last night. Also, how could workaholic Jason leave his work and rush back for me? Let alone wait downstairs at my place. I sneered, feeling ashamed of having such a wishful thinking dream. 12 After washing up and walking into the living room, I saw the breakfast on the table at a glance. There was simple millet porridge with 2 light side dishes. In the center of the dining table, there was a bouquet of lilies that had been arranged, with dewdrops still on them. For the first time, the cold apartment had a touch of the warmth of daily life. I pulled out the note that was pressed under the dish plate. The handwriting on it was neat and clean. Sister, I've gone to work. If the porridge on the table gets cold, don't drink it. There's still some warm in the pot. You can help yourself. Just put the bowls in the sink. I'll wash them when I come back tonight. He was really thoughtful and sensible. The side dishes were delicious, and the millet porridge was cooked soft and glutinous. I drank it and then went to the pot to get another bowl. After drinking it, I consciously put the bowls and chopsticks into the sink and soaked them with some water. Of course, I didn't wash them, not because I was lazy, but because I didn't know how to. The basic requirement for a qualified playboy is to spend money like water. The basic requirement for an excellent sister is to dote on her brother. After soaking the bowls, I decided to go on a shopping spree and buy Edward some decent clothes. Although my father was an irresponsible father, he really didn't stint on money for me. After all, with such a big family business, if his own daughter lived like a refugee, he should feel ashamed too. 13 During the years when I was chasing after Jason like a lovesick puppy, I bought him a lot of clothes. So I was quite proficient in choosing men's clothes. I went to several luxury stores that I used to frequent and had all the clothes that looked suitable for Edward wrapped up. More than 2 hours later, just as I stuffed the big and small bags of my shopping trophies into the trunk of the Range Rover, I received a transfer message on my phone. Jason transferred 500,000 yuan into my account. I dug out his number and sent him a row of question marks. Soon I received his reply. Simon said he saw you buying clothes for me at Brioni. Maybe I was too engrossed in shopping that I didn't even notice Simon was there. I transferred the money back to him. Yes, I bought clothes, but not for you. Jason didn't reply again, and I didn't care either. Thinking that Edward didn't have a mobile phone yet, I went back to the Huawei store and bought him the latest model of mobile phone. The hair salon didn't close at noon, so I didn't have a chance to give the things I bought for Edward to him until evening. I urged him to go and change clothes. Once again, his face turned red. He twisted the hem of his shirt with his hands, looking a bit nervous. Sister, don't buy me things anymore. I have enough. I flicked his smooth forehead and said with a smile, I call this an investment. You have to pay me back. You'll have to earn a lot of money to support me in the future. He smiled with his eyes narrowed, and it seemed that there were stars twinkling in his brown eyes. He said, okay. Crisp and firm. Actually, I didn't really want him to pay me back. I said that just so he wouldn't feel burdened when accepting the things. Maybe people who are too eager for warmth are like this. When others are nice to them by one point, they want to repay tenfold. It's just that at that time, I forgot that Edward, who grew up in an orphanage, was far more eager for warmth and a home than I was. 5 days later, Jason came back. Sarah asked me if I wanted to pick him up at the airport. I refused her without even thinking. I'm busy. I have to accompany my brother today. Edward was having a rare day off. I promised him to accompany him to the amusement park. We went to ride the roller coaster and the pendulum ride together. For the first time, I saw him laughing so heartily, and my mood also became cheerful. No matter how sensible and mature he was still just a newly adult kid. At the highest point of the Ferris wheel, he looked out at the distant mountains, rivers, and ridges and said, Sister, I will definitely earn a lot of money in the future and give you a home that everyone will envy. What he said had quite the air of, look, this is the kingdom I've conquered for you. We played until the sun set in the west and then walked home together under the sunset glow. On the way home, we also stopped by the nearby vegetable market to buy some groceries. Edward carried the groceries and walked in front, and I followed behind, stepping on his shadow. What are you doing? He turned around and asked me. His handsome baby-faced look was full of the vitality of youth. His cheeks were flushed a bright red, looking even more charming under the orange-red sunset glow. I held the strap of my backpack and smiled at him, stepping on your shadow. This way you can't run away. He licked his lower lip slightly and looked at me with a somewhat burning gaze. I won't run away, he said. 15 downstairs of the apartment, Jason was leaning against the car door, waiting for me. There was fatigue on his face, and he looked travel-worn. Seeing Edward walking side by side with me, his thick eyebrows, which had rarely been relaxed, furrowed together again. He stood up straight and nodded at Edward with his chin and asked, Aren't you going to introduce us? Introduce then. I affectionately pulled Edward over. My brother Edward. Sarah's brother. Probably not very satisfied with the introduction I gave him, a tinge of anger clouded Jason's deep and handsome face. Since when did you have a brother? How come I didn't know? True to being siblings, they even asked the exact same question. I didn't want to pay attention to him. I tugged at Edward's arm, wanting to go home. But after just taking a couple of steps, I was abruptly pulled back by Jason. I need to talk to you about something. I stopped, turned my head to look at him, and signaled him to go on. He cleared his throat, and his tone softened a bit. I'm here to get the clothes you bought for me the other day. In the palm of my hand, the muscle lines on Edward's wrist tensed up. I squeezed it soothingly. Looking up at Jason, I said, I told you already. They weren't bought for you. Jason obviously didn't believe it and was trying hard to suppress his impatience. Wendy, stop messing around. Why would he think I was messing around? I'm so tired of hearing things like, Wendy, stop messing around, and, Wendy, be obedient. I looked straight into his eyes and said each word very seriously, I don't like you anymore. Jason stayed for a long time before leaving. Looking down from upstairs, his tall figure looked desolate and lonely. Edward stood by the floor-to-ceiling window and watched for a long time. His delicate eyebrows and eyes were hidden in the gradually darkening night. After a while, he slowly turned his head and asked me, "Is he your boyfriend, sister?" It took me a few minutes to figure out who he was referring to. No. He was just the man I had been chasing after for 10 years. I didn't say the rest out loud. Chasing after him for 10 years without even getting a proper status. To be honest, it was quite embarrassing. That night, I received a greeting from my father, whom I hadn't been in contact with for a long time. He wasn't the least bit wordy. He immediately asked me where this brother of mine came from. When he was told that it was an orphan I picked up, he even cursed loudly. "You ungrateful brat. You don't recognize your own brother at home but pick up a bastard from outside?" I gritted my back teeth and retorted, "My mother only gave birth to me. Where would I get a biological brother? And Edward isn't a bastard. He's my family." Amid my father's yelling, I hung up the phone. In the second year after my mother's death, the mistress entered the family with a big belly, looking quite proud. I found it so disgusting to look at that I simply moved out. Anyway, my father had plenty of houses under his name. It's just that my mother died so pointlessly, making room for others for nothing. How silly. But he refused without hesitation. The days of not having to work and being a useless person at home were too boring. So I begged Edward to take me to work with him. I asked him why. His handsome little face was serious as he said, "Sister, you're too beautiful. Others will have designs on you." What a flattering compliment. It really made me very happy. That night, I received a call from Simon. "Wendy, Jason is drunk. Can you come and pick him up?" I was just about to refuse when he continued, "We're in the blue sea listening to the Wind Pavilion now." My right eyelid twitched. I had a bad feeling. After quickly getting myself ready, I drove there. Throwing the keys to the valet, I happened to see a waiter passing by with a tray just as I entered. I quickly grabbed him and asked, "Where's Edward?" The waiter was very respectful. It seems that a guest in the listening to the Wind Pavilion ordered him. There are 4 top VIP boxes in the Blue Sea Bar, named after the 4 elements of wind, flower, snow, and moon. The listening to the Wind Pavilion is one of them. Sure enough, it was just as I expected. In the box, Jason was leaning on the sofa, his eyes vacant. Edward was standing beside him, holding an opened bottle of Louis XIII. When he saw me enter, his eyes darkened and he called out, "Sister." I snatched the bottle from his hand and put it on the table, then grabbed his hand and wanted to walk out. Just after taking 2 steps, the bottle behind me fell to the ground, followed by a cold and sinister voice, "Is it because of him?" I froze on the spot. The last time he spoke in such a tone was when I was 18 and went out to play with Sarah. On our way home, we were stopped and harassed by 2 hooligans. I covered Sarah and let her escape. 10 minutes later, those 2 hooligans were tearing at my clothes when Sarah brought Jason back. That was the only time I saw an enraged Jason. He was holding a metal baseball bat, his eyes bloodshot, and he went crazy hitting those 2 guys. In the end, if it wasn't for Sarah and me stopping him, he probably would have beaten them to death. Although their lives were saved later, one of them had his leg broken. Fortunately, both of our families were wealthy. We paid some money and the matter was dropped. After so many years, how could I have forgotten that he was never a gentle and easygoing person? I shielded Edward behind me and turned to face Jason. "No, our business has nothing to do with anyone else. The clothes he's wearing are the latest summer collection of Brioni, right?" Jason stood up and walked towards me step by step. "Wendy, why can't you just be obedient?" His breath blew on my face, smelling of alcohol. Edward gently pulled from behind, switching our positions. The muscles on his face were tense. His beautiful peach blossom eyes stared at Jason like a little wolf cub ready to pounce and bite. Jason's temper, as Sarah put it, was overbearing. To deal with him, you have to stroke his ego. This was the experience I had gleaned over the past 10 years. I signaled Simon to take Edward out. Simon was always good at reading the situation. Probably also worried about a conflict between the 2, he walked up and grabbed Edward's arm to pull him out. "Let's go, little brother. Let's not be the third wheel here. Let your sister and your future brother-in-law have a good talk." Edward was stubborn. No matter how hard he was pulled, he refused to move. His words were also angry. "He's not my brother-in-law." I patted his tense back and softened my voice. "You go out with Simon first. I'll be fine." Edward never disobeyed me. Although he was worried, he still followed Simon out, looking back 3 times with each step. When he reached the door, he turned back and said to me, "Sister, I'll be waiting outside the door. If anything happens, just shout." His genuine concern warmed my heart. When the door of the box closed, Jason grabbed my chin with one hand, making me look at him. "Wendy, don't look at others. I can't stand it." His hoarse voice carried an unmistakable sense of grievance. After saying that, he buried his head in my neck. His breathing was a bit heavy, warm and a bit damp, tickling me. I gently pushed him. "You're drunk. I'll take you home." I pushed a few times but couldn't move him. Instead, I was pulled into his arms. "I'm not drunk," he murmured. "I like you, Wendy. I do like you." If it were more than half a month ago, before he deleted me on that rainy night, I would surely be overjoyed now. But unfortunately, time can't be reversed. There's a saying, late affection is cheaper than grass. I quietly let him hold me, my chest feeling sour and swollen. It had nothing to do with love. It was just grievance, overwhelming grievance. I felt aggrieved for the once humble me who had chased after him for 10 years without ever getting a positive response. And also for the lonely me who was abandoned on a stormy night to face my fears alone. Tears fell down uncontrollably, one after another. Soon, they soaked through Jason's shirt. Feeling the dampness on his chest, Jason let go of me and took a step back, holding my face in both hands. "Why are you crying?" I bit my lower lip and sobbed. "Jason, I can't forget the pain even when the scar has healed, let alone when it hasn't scabbed yet. You say you like me. If you really did, how could you bear to delete me? How could you bear to make me feel so low? For the whole night? You should know very well how scared I was." Jason bent down to kiss away my tears. When the second kiss was about to fall, I pushed him away forcefully and fled in a hurry. Once upon a time, I had looked forward to his kisses so much. Now, I was repelled by them. I've never been the kind of person who forgets the pain once the scar has healed. Never. 19. Sure enough, Edward was waiting outside the door, his handsome face showing undisguised concern. Seeing me come out crying, he hurriedly and flusteredly wiped my tears and asked anxiously, "What's wrong? Did he bully you? I'll go and deal with him." After saying that, he wanted to walk towards the box. I grabbed him, sobbing and shaking my head. "Edward, I want to go home." Not to mention whether he could defeat Jason or not. Just Jason's iron-fisted and ruthless ways in the business world in recent years made even my father show some deference. How could I let him go up against Jason like an egg hitting a stone for my sake? Edward looked down at me. His eyes under the light were shining brightly, unable to conceal the deep concern in them. His voice was hoarse, as if he had grown up a lot in that instant. "Okay, let's go home." I asked the foreman to give him a leave. Due to my identity, the foreman didn't make things difficult either. On the way home, Edward kept looking at the street scenes on the roadside. The warm yellow streetlights clearly illuminated the redness at the corners of his eyes. I patted his clenched fist hanging by his side and coaxed him with a stuffy nose. "I'm okay." He maintained his original posture, but his words were choked with sobs. "I will definitely be able to protect you in the future, sister. Wait for me." He was really just a kid, completely unable to hide his emotions. I nodded and said, "I'll wait for you." The tears that had just stopped in my eyes began to well up again. So, this was what it felt like to be cared about. 20. Jason started to call and send messages to me like crazy. Fed up with it, I blocked all his contact information. When I was chasing after him, he treated me like air and seldom took the initiative to contact me. But now that I had given up, he started to harass me nonstop. 10 years couldn't make him realize his feelings for me. But now that he had just lost me, he suddenly came to his senses? That was just too ridiculous. So, I naturally defined his behavior as being drunk and crazy. Sure enough, everything returned to normal the next day after I woke up. After lying around at home for 2 days, Edward resigned. When he opened the door and walked in with groceries, I was standing on the scale in my pajamas, pinching the soft flesh on my waist with both hands, looking completely hopeless. Did you just wake up? He put the groceries on the table, a faint smile on his lips. His eyes looked like, doting? I rubbed my eyes. I must still be groggy from just waking up. He walked up to me, looked down at the number on the scale, and read it out softly. 52.8? I didn't care about rubbing my eyes anymore. I tiptoed and pounced on him to cover his eyes. You're not allowed to look. As a result, I didn't stand firmly on my feet and threw myself into his arms. He smelled of the sweet bergamot, my favorite scent. Out of instinct, I hugged his waist tightly, and he also subconsciously held me. With my face pressed against his chest, his heartbeat was fast and strong, pounding against my eardrums, and even making my heartbeat go out of rhythm. Feeling my face burning, I quickly struggled to stand still. Edward tightened his arms around me and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Sister, don't move." I was like a doll whose switch had been pressed. I immediately stopped struggling and huddled in his arms, letting him hold me. Feeling that the atmosphere was getting too ambiguous, I asked, "Why are you back at this hour?" It was only around 11 o'clock in the noon. Logically, he should be at the hair salon working. A few minutes later, he slowly let go of me. I resigned. "Sister, let's go on a trip." 21 Going on a trip was great. Then I wouldn't have to eat the meals he cooked anymore. Can you imagine? In less than a month, I had actually gained over 10 pounds. Over 10 pounds. That was a huge chunk of flesh. There was nothing I could do. The kid cooked really delicious meals. Spring City was a well-known tourist city in China, receiving tens of thousands of tourists every day. Jason's family made their fortune in the tourism industry and later expanded into hotel and catering, construction, and other industries. But traveling is just going from a city you're tired of living in to a city others are tired of living in. Spring City didn't have the sea, and neither did Yunnan Province where Spring City was located. Edward said he wanted to see the real blue sea and clear sky. So we set our destination as another coastal tourist city as famous as Spring City, Deer City. We decided to go on the trip right away. That afternoon, we started making travel plans and packing our luggage. When we were about to book plane tickets, Edward stopped me. "Sister, let me do it." His face was red, but he was extremely determined. A man's dignity and face, I understand. I handed him my ID card and watched him operate from the side. His chubby little face was deliberately tensed into a serious look, but the smile on his lips couldn't be suppressed. Ah, what a childish ghost. 22 For the trip, I specially got up very early the next day. I changed into a bohemian-style floral long dress and loosely tied my hair with a hairband of the same color. Edward was also dressed in casual clothes, which matched my outfit quite well. I pinched his baby fat and gently pulled it. "My brother is really handsome." He blushed again and lowered his head, smiling as he said, "Sister is also very beautiful." His eyelashes, like crow feathers, drooped down, covering the light in his eyes. His habit of blushing at the slightest provocation made my heart itch. Being so shy, I really wanted to tease him. After packing everything up and carrying our luggage out, we ran into Jason at the door. He had a gloomy face, with 2 obvious dark circles under his eyes, looking quite irritable. "Where are you going?" he asked. Maybe he had smoked too much, and his voice was so hoarse that you could hear the friction of the particles. I frowned at him. "Going on a trip." Jason stared straight at me and suddenly curled his lips into a smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Wendy, I warned you. Isn't it better to be obedient?" Obedient? I had been obedient for 10 years. What did I get in return? Being talked about behind my back by countless people for being clingy, and being left alone on the stormy night that I feared the most. Edward stepped between me and Jason, raised his arm to wrap around my shoulder and led me away. After walking a certain distance, I looked back. Jason was still standing there, looking at Edward with eyes full of ruthlessness. I shivered subconsciously. "Sister, are you cold?" Edward lowered his head and asked me softly. I shook my head. It wasn't cold. It was fear. 10 minutes later, on the way to the airport, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Don't force me to deal with him. Maybe my complexion didn't look good." Jason leaned over from the side, pulled out a tissue and wiped the thin sweat on my forehead. "What's wrong?" I hurriedly turned off the phone screen in a flurry and forced a smile. "Nothing. Maybe I didn't sleep well last night." 23 This summer in Deer City was extremely hot, so hot that it evaporated Edward's initial excitement about seeing the blue sea and clear sky. After staying in Deer City for 2 days, unable to bear the high temperature, we moved on to the Western Sea. Maybe because it was out of his reach, Jason didn't take any action. Instead, Sarah called me several times. She told me, "That kid's background is unknown. You just brought him home like this, Wendy. Don't get cheated." Cheated? What did I have that was worth him cheating me for? Money? If it was really for money, then I'd let him cheat me. As long as he could give me a home, even if his care and concern were all pretended. I didn't care. As long as I could have a home. The weather in the Western Sea and Deer City were two extremes, one being a sweltering summer and the other being freezing cold. Wrapped in the newly bought cotton-padded clothes, we went to rent a car. When traveling in the Western Sea, self-driving was the essence. I asked Edward, "Can you drive?" He shook his head, looking a bit shy. "It's okay. I'll teach you." Edward was quick-witted and learned things fast. We set off from Sheeping County and drove along the Ring Road. When we reached Bouchouan-Nur, it snowed heavily. We parked the car by the roadside, and Edward pulled me to run down and build a snowman. Halfway through building it, his head was covered with a layer of white snow. I wanted to brush it off for him, but he dodged by tilting his head. His handsome face was hidden in the scarf, and his expression couldn't be seen clearly. But his exposed peach blossom eyes were shining brightly. Through the scarf, his voice sounded muffled. "Sister, it's said on the internet that if two people experience snow together, they can grow old together." Looking at the light in his eyes, my heart felt a pang of pain like being pricked by a needle. I also hoped that when we were old, he could come to see me with his family and still call me sister with a smile. But it was impossible. 24 We stopped and went along the way. The big ring road that could be completed in a week took us more than 10 days. When we returned to Spring City, it was already the end of August. I contacted Sarah and asked her to arrange a meeting with Jason for me. Jason didn't show up right on time this time. When I arrived at the coffee shop, he had already been waiting there for a long time. He was dressed in a handmade custom silver gray suit, looking noble and aloof. Maybe because I had been looking at Edward for a long time. Now, when facing this face that once fascinated me, I actually thought it was quite ordinary. "What would you like to drink?" he asked. "No, thank you, I didn't want to exchange too many pleasantries with him. I just want to tell you that my brother is starting school soon. In a couple of days, he'll leave Spring City for Kyoto. And later, I won't contact him anymore." Jason took a sip of coffee, his expression inscrutable. He asked again, "And then?" I clenched the fabric of my dress at my knees, lowered my head so that he couldn't see my already red eyes. "Don't touch him. He's still just a child." "Wendy," he called my name, with a touch of tenderness. "I thought you knew that I don't like any opposite sex around you except me. Last time when I deleted you, I thought you would learn your lesson." I suddenly looked up, glaring at him with gritted teeth. I didn't expect that he would bring up the matter of deleting me on his own initiative. "Jason, how dare you mention it?" Jason's eyes flickered. "If it weren't for you..." He was probably going to accuse me. But when he saw the tears in my eyes halfway through his words, he stopped and changed his tone. "I'm sorry." "Is sorry enough? If I stabbed you and then apologized to you, would you not feel the pain?" I stood up, not wanting to be alone with him for another moment. Before leaving, still not at ease, I warned him again. Don't touch my brother. When he goes to Kyoto, I'll cut off all ties with him cleanly. 25 I had only known Edward for a little over a month, but I didn't expect that I would rely on him so much. During this more than 1 month, he would put a bouquet of flowers with dewdrops in the vase on the table every day, would cook a meal and keep it warm in the pot for me before going out to work, and would lean against my door on stormy, thundering nights and tell me again and again that he was there. I drove the car onto a sparsely populated road and burst into loud sobs inside the car. I thought I could have a home. But why on earth couldn't it work out? I don't want to give up Edward, but what can I use to fight against Jason? Jason had taken over the Jen family business a few years ago. Edward, on the other hand, is an orphan with no power or influence. As the head of the Jen family, Jason could quietly get rid of him just by spending some money. I'm just a useless person too. I know very well that my father would never go head to head with Jason for my sake. I don't dare, really don't dare. I didn't stop crying until my throat was hoarse and there was a faint taste of rust in my mouth. After adjusting my mood, I took out a small mirror from my bag to touch up my makeup. Only then did I drive back home. When I opened the door, the smell of food filled the room. Edward poked his head out from the kitchen. Sister, you're back. There's one more dish. Wash your hands first, and we can eat soon. I think this is the kind of life I've been longing for. There's someone at home who has cooked a meal and is waiting for you, smiling and saying it's time to wash your hands and eat. It's just that I'm about to lose this kind of life. 26 As the school start date was approaching, there were many things to prepare. I wanted to be nicer to Edward, even nicer. I didn't know what exactly to do to be nice to him, so I just went on a crazy shopping spree. When I came home with big and small bags again, Edward's handsome little face turned red and then pale, which was quite a sight. After that, he wouldn't let me go out alone. Amid my wild shopping sprees that he tried to stop, the day for Edward to go to school to register arrived. I sent him to the airport. In the bustling waiting hall, I asked for his wallet on the pretext of checking if he had brought all his identification documents. Then I sent him to buy me some water to get him out of the way, and secretly took a photo of his bank card with my mobile phone. He came back quickly, trotting all the way to me. Handing me the water, he said, panting slightly, "Here you are, sister." His fair and handsome face was a bit flushed from the exercise, and there were tiny beads of sweat on his forehead. "Why were you running? Look at you, sweating all over your head," I scolded. He scratched his head and smiled shyly. "I was afraid you'd be thirsty." The hand holding the bottle unconsciously tightened, making the plastic bottle rustle. My eyes felt sore and swollen, and a tear uncontrollably fell down, followed by another one. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, like beads with a broken string. Edward was in a flurry, trying to wipe my tears, but the more he wiped, the more tears came. "Don't cry, sister. I. He stammered for a long time but couldn't come up with anything. His usually gentle and pleasant voice was also choked with sobs. I grabbed the corner of his clothes, sobbing and saying in a broken voice, I can't bear to part with you." He softened his voice and coaxed me in a low voice, "I'll come back as soon as the vacation starts. Don't cry, okay?" I nodded, but couldn't bring myself to say that, okay. "Sorry, Edward. Sister can't wait for you to come back." 27 I watched him go through the security check. I stood there in a daze for a long time before dragging my heavy legs out of the terminal building. The weather in Spring City was nice, with clear blue skies, looking as beautiful as an inkwash painting. But I only felt depressed, extremely depressed. Starting from today, I'm alone again. When I got back to the apartment, Jason was waiting downstairs. He was the last person I wanted to see right now, so I walked around him to go home. "Accompany me to a cocktail party tonight," he said from behind. I ignored him and walked straight to the door, opened it, and slammed it shut right in front of him. Only then did the pent-up frustration in my heart ease a little. Since I lived alone, I deliberately chose a small 2-bedroom, 1 living room apartment at the beginning. I didn't notice it before, but now that Edward had left, it felt terrifyingly empty. I huddled on the sofa in the living room, lost in a daze for a long time. As night fell, the familiar ringtone of my mobile phone pulled me back to reality. As soon as I picked it up, Edward's voice came through the receiver. "Good evening, sister." I cleared my throat and tried hard to make my voice sound cheerful. "Good evening, Edward." "Sister, what are you doing? Have you had dinner?" "I've just finished packing my things. I'll start military training tomorrow." I listened to him chattering about what he had done since arriving at school and what he was going to do next, and I responded to him occasionally. As time passed, suddenly a phrase came to my mind: tranquil days. If the doorbell hadn't rung later, I even thought that this phone call with Edward could go on forever. Outside the door, Jason was dressed in formal attire, with two stylists carrying boxes behind him. In the end, I still followed Jason to the cocktail party where glasses were clinking. Because he said one thing to me. He said, "Don't think that just because he's gone to Kyoto I can't deal with him." He knew very well that the shy 18-year-old boy had become my weak spot. This was the first time in so many years that he had taken me to such an occasion. Forcing a smile, I stood beside Jason, listened to him exchange greetings with others, and numbly accepted the new identity he gave me: girlfriend. After dealing with the whole dinner party, I was exhausted both physically and mentally. On the way home, the driver sensibly raised the partition. In the enclosed back seat, there were only Jason and me. He tucked the loose strands of my hair behind my ear, and his words were gentle and affectionate, like whispers on Valentine's Day. "Tired?" Yes, I was tired. Tired of acting with him. "Jason, we can't go back. Let's just..." Halfway through my words, he pinched my cheeks, forcing me to be quiet. His face was getting closer and closer, and his thin lips pressed against my pouted lips, the fruity aroma of the dry red wine stimulating my taste buds. I struggled to push him away, swung my arm round, and slapped him hard. "Are you crazy?" I gritted my teeth, my voice trembling. Jason ran his middle fingertip across his lips and sneered, "Yes, I'm crazy. Wendy, you said you liked me the most, didn't you?" Yes, I used to tell him over and over again that Jason, I like you the most in the whole world. But all I got was his cold face. After thinking about it, I transferred the small apartment where I was currently living to Edward's name. Anyway, I couldn't continue living here anymore. It would be better to leave it to him. At least that way, it would still make me feel that my home was still there. After doing all this, I edited a text message and sent it to Edward. The general content was to thank him for acting in a play with me. These could be regarded as his payment. I told him not to look for me again in the future, and that his identity didn't deserve to be my family. In short, the words were really harsh. My heart ached when I read them myself. After sending the message successfully, I took a screenshot, blocked Edward, and then unblocked Jason. I sent the screenshot to him. "It's all cut off cleanly. I hope you'll keep your word and don't cause him any trouble. It was I who dragged an innocent child into this mess. Anyway, I had to send him out safely. Even if letting go was far more painful than I had imagined." 29 Without Edward, life became monotonous again. I went shopping with Sarah, attended some fake sister gatherings. The days were dull and boring. Half a month passed in a daze. Edward came back. He blocked me outside the luxury store I often went to. In just half a month, he had lost a lot of weight. He looked even more down and out than on the rainy night when I picked him up. The light in his peach blossom eyes that used to be there was gone. He asked me, "Didn't we agree not to abandon each other?" I turned my head to one side, not looking at him, because I was afraid that I would break down and cry. It was just a boring pastime. Only a poor kid like you would take it seriously. Edward clenched his fists tightly. His eyes were bloodshot as he asked me again, "Sister, do you really not want me anymore?" I gritted my teeth and asked him back, "Do you think you deserve it?" The next second, a thin card fell in front of me. "Yes, I don't deserve it. Take your money. I don't care about it." He walked away resolutely. I watched his straight back, hugged my arms, and slowly crouched down, crying uncontrollably again. Why could it hurt so much? 30 after that, I never saw Edward again. That clean, innocent boy with stars in his eyes when he smiled finally disappeared from my life. I entered my father's company, learning to negotiate projects and read business plans. From a notorious playboy, I became the most ambitious second-generation heir in the upper-class circle of Spring City. Sarah asked me why I was working so hard. I said I didn't want to experience the despair of not being able to protect the person I cared about again. In the business world, Jason taught me a lot. He also really kept his promise and didn't cause any trouble for Edward. The name Edward was like a gust of wind, leaving no trace after blowing past. No one knew how much I missed him. I learned to cook. When I didn't work overtime, I would go back and cook 2 small dishes for myself. On my way to work, I would buy a bouquet of flowers with dewdrops and take them to the office. Jason laughed at me, asking why I had suddenly become so artistic. I said, life needed a sense of ceremony. Life needs a sense of ceremony. I wonder if Edward thought the same when he put flowers in the vase every day. Jason had mentioned dating me many times, but I always deflected his advances skillfully. After Sarah hinted to me with hesitation that her brother was old enough to get married, I got Jason drunk and sent him to the bed of a rich girl who had been secretly in love with him for years. It was a bit embarrassing to admit. During the years when I liked Jason, I had many fights with other girls because of jealousy. Now, sending Jason to her was like an apology for my youthful ignorance. To be on the safe side, I deliberately called both mothers and arranged a scene of catching them in the act. Jason was wrapped in a quilt, his upper body bare, with scattered small scratches on his body. He looked at me with bitter eyes, and his voice had a desolate and broken quality. He said, "Wendy, you're really cruel." I curled my lips slightly. "The same to you." When he forced me to give up Edward, he wasn't exactly kind either. More than half a month later, I received Jason's engagement invitation. I didn't go to the engagement party because I had an interview appointment that day. A young journalist held a microphone and asked me where the city I most wanted to go was. Without hesitation, I said Kyoto. She then asked me why I wanted to go to Kyoto. Why did I want to go to Kyoto? Because my brother was there, and my home was there. It turned out that subconsciously, I had already identified that wherever Edward was, that was my home. I was lost in thought for a while. The young journalist called to me, "Do you need to think about it for so long, Miss Wendy?" I laughed heartily. "No, I just want to see the heart of our motherland. Some thoughts don't need to be expressed verbally." Missing Edward has always been something I keep to myself. 32 in the 6th year since leaving Edward, I turned 30. I started to be involved in various blind date dinners. My father had grown old. Instead of scolding me arrogantly, he adopted a conciliatory approach and would play the pity card every now and then. I'm the type who responds better to kindness than to harshness. I couldn't bear to see him shaking his head and sighing, so I simply gave in to his wishes and started going on blind dates obediently. Blind dating is truly an extremely boring thing. I stirred my coffee and pretended to be elegant as I listened to a young entrepreneur from a certain company across from me talk about his requirements for a life partner. A chubby little kid toddled over and hugged my leg, looking up at me and calling out in a babyish voice, "Mommy." I pretended to be surprised and picked her up. "Zhang Zhang, why did you come here?" The little kid left a slobbery, loud kiss on my cheek. "I missed you." Her cute little appearance was so endearing that it could melt anyone's heart. The young entrepreneur was already petrified. I gave him an apologetic smile. "Sorry, my daughter might have been crying to find me, so my friend sent her over. You don't mind, do you?" The other person's face visibly darkened. "Why are you on a blind date when you already have a child?" I shrugged. "I just want to find a cheap daddy for my kid." 33 The next day, because of hiring a fake daughter, I was called to the top floor by my father and scolded for half a day. On my way back, as I passed the secretary's office, several young girls were peeking around the door frame, all looking flushed and excited. "What are you all looking at?" I asked with a cold face. "My personal secretary, Xiaoyu," blushed and moved closer to me. President Wendy, the person in charge from HM has arrived. I said, where is he now? Xiaoyu's face turned even redder. He's waiting for you in your office. HM is a rising star in Kyoto in recent years, emerging as a dark horse. It's said that the founder has a powerful background. Naturally, a background in Kyoto surely implies more than just money. Once it's related to power and influence, their status is definitely a notch higher than us mere businessmen who are just scrambling for profits. I straightened my clothes, put on a proper smile, and walked towards my office. Sorry to have kept you waiting for so long. As I pushed open the office door and saw the person sitting on the office chair with his legs crossed, I froze on the spot. The words that were halfway out got stuck in my throat. The baby fat was gone, and his delicate facial features had become even more three-dimensional, looking even more stunning than before. No wonder the young girls in the secretary's office were all blushing and had a dreamy look in their eyes. He didn't get up. He propped his arms on the armrests of the chair, crossed his long fingers in front of his chest, forming an arch. Long time no see, he said with a smile, his tone distant and polite. Yes, long time no see. I missed you so much. Edward didn't exchange any pleasantries with me. He ordered me to gather the team for a meeting. He was completely businesslike. HM is going to build a huge theme park in Spring City. The chosen site happens to be right next to the small apartment where we used to live. After the meeting, we had to go and inspect the construction site immediately. I looked at my 10-centimeter high heels and the tight skirt that restricted my movement and said, I'll go and change my clothes. He glanced at me expressionlessly, his tone solemn. Is President Wendy going to make all of us wait for you alone? 6 years is a long time, long enough for my once young boy to grow into an unapproachable figure. He no longer blushed shyly and called me sister. Instead, he called me President Wendy. His once shiny eyes were now cold and indifferent when looking at me. There was a lump in my throat, neither going up nor down, making me feel really uncomfortable. I lowered my head to hide my expression and apologized in a low voice. Sorry, it was my oversight. Let's set off now. The construction site had just started, and the road was bumpy. I walked unsteadily beside Edward in my high heels. Somehow, someone accidentally bumped into me. I lost my balance and fell straight towards Edward. He quickly caught me, his brows furrowed tightly, his voice tense. President Wendy, please behave yourself. His big hands were gripping my waist, and the heat penetrated through the thin fabric, burning hot. I stood up in a flurry. Sorry. He squeezed his palms as if he was a bit irritated. Forget it. Let's go back first. We'll come again another day. When Sarah came to see me with Zhengzheng in her arms, I was staring blankly at the flowers on the table. Are you possessed by something evil or are you in love? I took Zhengzheng from her arms and teased her, joking, maybe spring has arrived. Why did you come here? My daughter was crying to find you. By the way, when I was waiting for the elevator just now, I saw someone who looked exactly like that kid you picked up a few years ago. I let out a soft sigh. It's him. Sarah's pupils dilated. Did you get him back? No, he's the boss of HM. Obviously, this news was too unexpected for Sarah, and she almost lost control of her facial expression. What did you say? Isn't the boss of HM surnamed Yun? Yes, his name is now Edward. After considering her words, Sarah asked, Wendy, you must have resented my brother a lot back then, right? How could I not resent him? If it weren't for him, how could I now be in a situation where seeing Edward again is even worse than seeing a stranger? I just smiled and teased Zhengzheng in my arms without answering. She was about to say something more when her phone rang in her bag. After answering the phone, she asked me to take care of Zhengzheng for a while and then left in a hurry. I gently scratched Zhengzheng's little tummy, making her giggle. I also laughed and said, Zhengzheng, will you accompany your godmother to work today? Zhengzheng couldn't say very complicated words yet and just called out in a babyish voice, Mommy, Mommy. I dug out the milk powder from the mommy bag Sarah left and made a bottle for Zhengzheng. Just as I handed it to her little hand, Edward knocked on the door and came in. He froze for a moment when he saw the little kid happily drinking from the bottle. I was about to explain when I heard him say, "Get ready. We'll go to Starlight Amusement Park later." Because of the plan to build a theme park, we had been visiting various amusement parks for inspection these days. "Can we do it another day? I need to take care of the baby," I said with little confidence. No wonder I was timid. Edward's poker face was really intimidating. He was still cold and unfeeling. "Bring her along." Carrying the baby out of the company, a black Maybach was already parked right in front of the main entrance. Edward lowered the window of the driver's seat and stuck his head out. "Get in." I thought it would be like before, with a group of people going together. Unexpectedly, it was just the three of us. Seeing my confusion, he controlled the steering wheel and explained to me, "There's something going on at the construction site. Everyone has been sent there." He didn't even spare me a glance from the corner of his eye when he was talking. After getting out of the car, Edward looked at the high heels on my feet and then at the little kid in my arms. Very gentlemanly, he took the child from me. Starlight is a children's amusement park, which is like heaven for Zheng Zheng. Perhaps because he grew up in an orphanage, Edward was really good at taking care of children. His face, which had been gloomy since we met again, finally softened a bit. He quickly won Zheng Zheng's wholehearted affection. I couldn't walk too far in my high heels. Seeing that the two of them got along well, I simply found a bench and sat down, watching them play from a distance. Edward took Zheng Zheng to play on the children's slide filled with ocean balls and then went to ride the merry-go-round. In the sunlight, he bent his head to coax Zheng Zheng in his arms, with a gentle smile on his lips. I couldn't help but stare blankly. It was 5 or 6 minutes later when I came to my senses. I quickly raised my hand to pat my burning cheeks and scolded myself inwardly. "Wendy, what are you thinking? You're 6 years older than him." I was certain that for a moment just then, I was attracted to him. I attributed my inappropriate thoughts about Edward to the season. It's only human nature to have a crush on a tall and handsome man in this sunny and breezy spring. Yes, that once innocent child had grown into an outstanding man during the years I wasn't involved. After getting off the merry-go-round, the little girl excitedly flapped her little hands. I walked over to take her so that Edward could have a rest. Unexpectedly, she turned her head and hugged Edward's neck, calling out clearly, "Daddy." The heat on my face exploded. I thought that after coming back from Starlight, my relationship with Edward would improve. But I was thinking too much. He still had a cold face and was polite to me. Feeling frustrated for 2 days, I asked Sarah to go to the bar with me to get drunk. Sarah had to take care of the child and couldn't drink. So in the end, I was the only one who got drunk. And I was so drunk that I blacked out. The next day, I woke up in my big pink bed. I was just about to send a message to ask Sarah how I got back when I received 2 short videos from her, followed by a line of text. "Girl, you're so brave." I clicked on them. In the first video, I was holding a wine glass and shouting, "Call Edward over for me. Hurry up. Call him over." In the second video, I was staggering and poking Edward's chest. "You're just a little brother, you know that. Edward, you're just a little brother." My tone was extremely arrogant. I covered my face with my hand. I wanted to die of embarrassment. Because of the drunken incident, I was too ashamed to face Edward. I avoided him whenever possible. When I couldn't avoid him, I would drag someone on the spot to keep me company. After a few days, I hadn't been alone with him again. During the Qingming festival holiday, Edward went back to Kyoto. I found that I missed him so much, really much. I think I might be in love. I fell for Edward, who had a gentle side profile in the sunlight at the amusement park. On the last night of the holiday, there was a really heavy rain. My longing for him reached its peak. The thunder was rumbling outside, but I wasn't afraid anymore. However, I still couldn't help but recall the time when he leaned against the door and said he was there. The next day at work, Edward didn't come back. I drifted through the morning in a daze. In the afternoon, I received a call from his assistant. "President Wendy, our President Edward has a fever, but I'm still in Kyoto and can't get back. Could you please go and take care of him? Has he come back? I asked. Yes, he came back last night. I just found out that he has a fever. Could you please go and take care of him, President Wendy? I'll give you the address. 20 minutes later, I stood at the door of the small apartment where Edward and I used to live, with mixed feelings. I didn't expect that he would live here. I rang the doorbell a few times, but no one answered. I tried entering the password that I knew by heart. Surprisingly, the password hadn't been changed. He was curled up on the sofa in the living room, his lips dry and peeling, his face abnormally flushed. I fed him some fever-reducing medicine. Perhaps because of the high fever, he was a bit delirious. He tugged at my clothes and muttered pitifully, "Sister, don't go." I touched his burning forehead and coaxed him softly, "I won't go. I won't go." As I was speaking, tears fell down. 39 When I was cooking porridge in the kitchen, Edward woke up. His tall figure leaned against the kitchen door frame, looking at me gloomily. "What are you doing here? Didn't you abandon me?" I lowered my head and said hesitantly, "I didn't." Perhaps because he was sick, his voice sounded unusually hoarse. "Say it again." "Yes, yes, yes. I said I want you." Suddenly raising my head, I shouted at him, and tears began to fall down patter by patter again. "Wendy, you said it. This time I won't give you a chance to go back on your word." After saying that through gritted teeth, he reached out, pulled me over, and wrapped me in his arms. Then he lowered his head and kissed me on the lips. After the kiss ended, I lay in his arms, with my hand against his chest, and said breathlessly, I'm much older than you." He gave me another gentle peck on the lips, and his eyes were filled with deep affection. "I'm already prepared to be a stepfather." Would I mind the age? Stepfather? What stepfather? I was puzzled. Didn't you say that? Find a stepfather for the child. So, was he there when I went on that blind date? I smiled and teased him, "It's okay if you want to be a stepfather, but I'm afraid the real father won't agree." His hands around my waist tightened, and his smile froze on his face, cracking inch by inch. "Who is it?" He spat out these two words with difficulty, and I saw a glint of panic in his eyes. How could I bear to continue bullying him? I stood on tiptoe and took the initiative to give him a light kiss, then smiled and said, "Zheng Zheng is Sarah's baby. She's too young to call anyone godmother, so she just calls her mom." After hearing what I said, Edward's handsome face was filled with ecstasy. "Let's work harder and try to arrange a baby engagement for them next year." Jason's side story. When did I fall in love with Wendy? Maybe it was when she huddled in a dark corner like a wounded little animal. Maybe, even earlier. When did I realize that I had fallen in love with Wendy? It was when she was almost violated, that day, when I saw her being pinned against the wall and her clothes being torn by someone I really had the urge to kill. Fortunately, in the end, she and Sarah stopped me, so a major disaster was avoided. After that incident, my grandfather punished me by making me copy the Jinshin Sutra for a whole month. It was also after that incident that I realized that I had an almost crazy possessive desire for Wendy. I was afraid that my possessive desire would scare her. So I tried my best to restrain myself and treated her coldly. She wasn't a girl who could hide her feelings. I knew she liked me because she often told me, "Jason, I like you the most in the whole world." On the surface, I pretended to be calm, but inside, I was overjoyed. I thought that I was the only one in her eyes, and I was used to her revolving around me. Until one day, I saw her smiling at the manager of the company's customer department. She smiled so brightly that it hurt my eyes. She often complained that I didn't take her to social engagements. She didn't know that it was because I didn't want to see her smiling at other men. So, when I saw that scene, I was driven mad. I deleted all her contact information. Coincidentally, there was a heavy rain that night. I knew she was afraid of thunder, but I just wanted to torture her. Because only when she was scared would she learn her lesson. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I kept my eyes open until dawn. The first thing I did when I went to work was to agree to add her as a friend. Never had I expected that instead of making her learn her lesson, this made her even more rebellious. She had a quarrel with me, and we parted on bad terms. There was a project in Shanghai that needed urgent negotiation, so I flew to Shanghai the next day. Sarah called me and said that there was a heavy rain in Spring City and it had been thundering all the time, and she had lost Wendy in such weather. When I rushed back to Spring City, the rain had stopped. I stood downstairs in her apartment for a long time. The light in the small apartment was on. I knew she had gone home, and then I felt relieved. I rushed back to Shanghai overnight. I came and left quietly. Except for my assistant, no one knew that I had been back. The next day, Simon sent me a candid photo. She was coming out of Brioni carrying big and small bags of men's clothing. I transferred 500,000 yuan to her, but she didn't accept it and said that it wasn't for me. I thought she was still angry with me, so I didn't take it to heart. I missed her so much that I managed to finish the workload of half a month in just 1 week. The first thing I did when I went back was to go to see her. Unexpectedly, there was a very handsome boy beside her. The two of them were joking and walking closer. I felt a bit panicked. She said that was her younger brother, but how could I be mistaken? The way that boy looked at her was unmistakable admiration. I didn't care if others liked her. My girl was so beautiful and lovely that it was natural that many people liked her. But this time, I felt a sense of crisis. Before, she would only buy clothes for me, but now the new polo shirt of Brioni was worn by someone else. I couldn't bear to have any opposite sex beside her except me. She was clearly supposed to rely only on me. So I forced her to break off contact with that boy. Sure enough, she was very obedient and also a bit silly. How could I really hurt the person she cared about so much? I was so afraid that she would hate me. She began to be more motivated. I taught her everything I knew. Even though I knew clearly that she wanted to make herself stronger and not be controlled by me, Sarah helped me. In the following years, I mentioned starting a relationship with her more than once, but she always managed to muddle through it. There was nothing I could do, so I asked for her help. As a result, the next day, she set me up and made me go to bed with someone else. I said she was cruel, and she said the same to me. It turned out that all these years, she had always resented me. Forget it, forget it. Let it be as she wishes. After all, I love her so much.